Hello friends, my name is host Eric, host Talking with French People, and today I'm making a video called INFJ Universality and Self-Concept. So a regular contributor, friend of the channel you might say, inartistically bred, quoted an ENTP talking about an INFJ. And this ENTP said, INFJs have incredible ego, that they have too inflated a self-concept, and that it makes them in some regard difficult to be with. I couldn't disagree more about this for a number of reasons, and I think that if anybody were to understand it as such, they would be misunderstanding what they're seeing. And I want to go over why, specifically, I don't agree with this idea that INFJs are particularly egotistical. And the reason is the externality of INFJs is even greater than that of ENTPs. Universal knowing is an absolute value in the first slot. That's external truth. External truth to them. Things that are true regardless of what they want to be true or their experience. That's their dominant nature. Their second one is in the third slot. Well, the next absolute value to note is in the third slot. Universal deliberation. In other words, external defensibility. Being able to defend something objectively outside of oneself when all parties can access all the arguments and determine universally who's right. Then in the second slot, the tool function, it's an instrumental value, but it's a tool function, so it's sets a lot of frames. It's an externally framed interface, which means FE. It ultimately validates on external metrics, not on internal metrics, on universal metrics. So again, their attention's external there. Now in the in the fifth slot, you've got your next absolute value, and that's novelty, which is an external or representational absolute value. Whether or not something's new has to do with not just new to you, but new in general is what's the value for an INFJ. Like, they're going to see a show they've never seen before, and they're going to have a position about whether or not that show is on the edge or not. Like, does it represent a curve? Like, is it ahead of the curve, so to speak, or not? They're going to have a sense of that, even though they've never seen the show before. They're going to relate it to basically their understanding of the media landscape as a whole and whether or not this thing plays universally as new or novel. So we see here with the first three the three most important absolute values, and with the instrumental value that functions most like an absolute value, which is the tool function, it's all externally directed attention. Now, the next absolute value that is the fourth slot, and this is why INFJs are, they're like every type, they're not entirely metaphysical. Every type has got three of one and one of the other. They're three physical or one metaphysical, or three metaphysical and one physical. INFJ, though, is the most metaphysical type because they've only got one function. The only function that's physical is in the fourth slot, and it's the external physical function, namely the action function. So again, you're looking at something that's external. In the fourth slot, experiential action is the absolute value in the fourth slot. And what is experiential action? I want to change this. Hold on. There. What is experiential action? It's impact. It's externally realized causality, seeing one's actions change the status quo. Namely, well, what have my actions done? How have they impacted the world? How have they impacted people? That's consideration of SE. And, that's their absolute value on the front stack in the physical world is going to be physical action. Specifically, for them, it's not even necessarily the follow through that's valued absolutely. That's more instrumental. For them, it's the actual physical action, like going out jogging, walking, having sex, playing a sport, or doing a thing, So, F, demonstrative experiential deliberation, instrumental only in the six. which means, all right, so now let's look at the particular things, ones that are not external, that are internal, like FI. FI is a wholly internal function. Not only is it happening internally, like SI and NI and TI all are happening internally. I mean, obviously, the attention is what that means to say it's happening internally. There's no cognitive function that doesn't happen inside of a human being, but to say it's happening internally means I'm taking data from the outside world, I'm processing it separate from the outside world, and then, returning with some sort of conclusion about it. Whereas an external thing is either taking action or interfacing with something directly that's actually in the outside world. So if I'm extrovertedly intuiting, I can do so in my head, but it's designed to be spoken aloud so that other people can hear it as well, to put on the external metaphysical plane these words. Now, the same thing is true of TI. While it's done internally, mostly not done aloud, other people can validate the successful TI-ness of this thing by checking it via the various TI means that we have. So basically, everything that's important to a person that really defines who they are is externally focused in the INFJ. In the sixth slot, when you get to the FI, even that, it's demonstrative. It manifests mostly responsive to external stimuli and in an interfacey kind of a way, almost like FE. It's a demonstration of FI that's designed to be communicative to other people. It's legitimate FI. It's not fake FI, so it's not FE. It's not constructed in any sense, but it's still expected by the individual expressing it to be expressive and communicative. G, non-willful instrumental experiential knowledge in the eighth. So SI is another place where they get in the particular, and for them, that particular is always serving the universal because it's in the eighth slot, and it's the least willful, probably, of all the functions. Just sort of happens without you understanding how or why or whatever, and not really having a clear, conscious, willful orientation towards it. So in that regard, their particularist epistemology, their way of knowing by their own experience, doesn't bring them back to a clear idea of self with the physical body, except in viewing it mostly as a potential source of problems. Like an INFJ will be aware if they're not feeling well and try to sort of universalize that shit, And then lastly here, blind particularist interface in the 7. So because of all this other stuff, they don't get how to interface in a way that requires attending to the actual particulars to the exclusion of conditional conditional understandings. If I say this doorknob is broken, they're going to continually try to find a way to either TI it, okay, well, if it's broken like this, then it must be like this, or blah, 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 or to NI it, like, well, what does one do when things like doorknobs break? Or when doorknobs in general break? Instead of actually looking at this specific doorknob and figuring out actually what specifically is wrong in this particular instance with these particulars. That is the blind spot of the INFJ. Now, in this comment by Eileen, there seemed to be a statement by this ENTP that she was quoting that INFJs have inflated self-concept and a huge ego. I would say that that's absolutely not the case. That, if anything, INFJs have a very uncertain self-concept. And that's their area of growth, as it is for the ENTP, who also has a very uncertain self-concept. But the ENTP self-concept is more certain than that of the INFJ, because we have SI, a physical, particular knowing function in the front stack, rather than an externalizing SE in the front stack. So at least we have that internal function that's physical in the front stack. They don't have that. And additionally, I would say that because any links to the internal knowledge function, the internal physical knowledge function, any is necessarily plays out kind of more particularist than does NI, which is a more universalist half of intuition. NE builds off of a variety of things to create. It utilizes the particular to make things that are novel in the universal without being non-interesting. I mean, to be successfully novel on the universal, it's got to both resonate universally as an example of something, but differ from that thing significantly enough to be its own kind of entity as well, and to be distinct in its entityhood. And so it's like that requires a balancing of SI and NI that's implicit in NE that's not necessarily implicit in NI. So as a consequence, you're dealing with the more metaphysical a type gets, the weaker the self-concept gets. The other two types who have weak self-concept are ENTJ and ENFJ. And in some sense, I think it's fair to say they have even weaker self-concept than INFJ and ENTP. Because that polar SI means they just don't get how a person's particular experience can define who they are in ways that defy the universal pattern. And that people can change and grow, right? And become different than they used to be. There's a tendency in NIFE types, especially the NFJs, to perceive people as expressions of their pattern. That changes in that would have been foreseeable if one understood the pattern earlier well enough that one could see that would be a manifestation of the pattern. SI types who are like polar NI don't get that things can be defined by the universal and not by the particular, and that manifests in a lot of different ways as well. So anyway, the point is, INFJs and ENTPs, unlike ENFJs and ENTJs, have access to and use the particular knowledge function approximately in similar proportions, insofar as I've got SI4, NI5. I use NI much more frequently because it's much more consistent with NE. Like I'm using NI mostly now. I draw SI and it serves the NI resonance of things. I'm mostly interested in resonating on a universal level because I'm using a universal action function, NE. But my NE's successful implementation that does resonate on NI requires I draw a lot from SI. So, but a lot of that drawing from it is invisible. When Rachel draws from SI, she almost explicitly draws from it, almost externalizes it and says, I am feeling meow right now, or I think I'm coming down with something, or I think I might be getting sleepy, or I think I might be getting hungry. And again, it's this very weird abstraction of what ought to be a physiological feeling as she tries to talk herself through what it is this SI experience is, because it's so non-willful. So it gets converted into NI basically, and NE. Like, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Okay, so in terms of self-concept then, the growth arc for the INFJ is to recognize the self as independent of and valuable inherently, despite the fact that their attention is on this very careful, delicate balance between that which is graceful, that which is true, and that which is defensible, and that which actually has impact, all of which are external, right? Plus that which is clever, again, external. And being sort of the master of deftly dancing among those sometimes competing, sometimes collaborative vectors means successfully coming off as this sort of sage-like wise type that understands can see when people are lying to them, has great intuition about certain things, yada, yada, yada. But it doesn't naturally, therefore, lend itself to a very clear and consistent and, I guess, ontologically satisfying self-concept. If you talk to an INFP, despite their NE, they know who they are. They may not know much else for certain, but they for certain know who they are. Now, the more metaphysical types like Rachel and me, it's much less clear about that. I'm FI polar. That puts me at a big disadvantage for knowing who I am, because it means that the element of self that most people rely upon for their absolute value of authenticity I can't really use it like that at all. I know when I feel things, but I can't rely on those feelings to validate anything. I don't feel like I can anyway, or I don't think I can, or I don't know. I do know that I end up using it anyway. Like, for example, I'm happy with Rachel. I'm happy all the time. And so, in that regards, I'm aware of that. I'm consciously noting it. I'm talking about it, all that kind of stuff. In that regard, I'm using FI in some sense. But what's important to note is how willing and able I have always been, and probably would be again if Rachel weren't the right person, to persist in the wrong relationship for a long time, despite it not making me feel good. So, in that regard, FI is not useful to me. It does not do what it ought to do, which is say, hey, authentically, this relationship is making you feel bad. You should leave it. That's enough reason. You don't need any other reasons. But my FI doesn't have that much pull in my calculus. So the TE polar is the thing that makes her equivalently balanced out in terms of self-concept to an ENTP, because TE polar is the most external of the, or one of the two external physical experiential functions. She has that one polar. So I've got an internal self function polar, but I've got an internal self function front stack. She's got no internal self function in the physical realm front stack, but she also has the external one polar. So it kind of balances out. All in all, I think Rachel and I are both helping each other reinforce, build, and define the self for the other person. It's this collaborative process that naturally occurs between the right two people who are both very metaphysical, as Rachel and I are. We are naturally refining our understandings of ourselves and the other person, eliminating all the heuristics, getting down to the particular universals, you might say. We started the relationship with Rachel sometimes affirming or reassuring me in ways that I didn't need affirmation and reassurance about or wasn't concerned about at all. Like, no, you're not fat. You're right, I'm not fat. I'm not worried about being fat. Not that that's an actual example, but that gives you a sense of what I'm talking about, where it's like she's bringing to this table universal assumptions about that she's universalized from previous experiences. That, sometimes men get concerned about their weight, so I should reassure about that. And in that instance, she's not using her SI very, very well. She's not looking and seeing like, well, he's not fat, so he's not going to be concerned about that. She's just using her NI until her SI serves her, until the SI experience actually serves for a better NI in front of her face. Like, in that regard, if I go like, well, I'm not worried about that, then that will change the NI, and she'll recognize, she'll say, okay, well, from now on I'm going to qualify this. I'm only going to be concerned about the NI of reassuring somebody if they actually have some sort of thing, and then that might let her down at some point in the future too. But it's just a process. It's a process of being an INFJ. The thing is, because we both are operating in the same currency, that is to say, trying to have the correct explanation for everything, and which words are correct and why they are correct, and which words are not correct and why they are not correct, and which statuses one ought to have, and what things they ought to correlate with, and stuff. Those are all matters of great concern to both metaphysical types. We also are bargaining in good faith. We actually want the best for each other, and so the natural outcome of that is two people who are enabling each other to construct the correct self-concept in ways that other relationships cause us to replace correct self-concept with heuristics about the outside world. If people are trying to give you the wrong self-concept about you, they're saying, you are like this, or you should be like this, or you are wrong because you are like this, like there's something wrong with you because you're like this, or meh, then you start to develop heuristics about the outside world. People are stupid. People don't know what the fuck they're talking about. Or you internalize it and go, there is something wrong with me. Or you're confused or whatever. It depends what function is predominant. For INFJ, they're unlikely to buy other people's bullshit because ultimately their intuition is going to tell them, but this is what is objectively true here. So, the end result is you have a lot of metaphysical baggage, as I say, extra tools and workarounds and other bullshit that you build into your self-concept and to your expressive self in the world that then need to be undone, gotten rid of, jettisoned, healed, whatever you want to say, when you have the opportunity to do so. That opportunity really, I suspect, only really arises for people like me and Rachel in the company of the appropriate significant other, namely me and or Rachel, respectively. But why do I really think that? Well, because my front stack knowledge function is SI, and that's my experience. Ought I universalize from my experience like that and say this is likely the case for all ENTPs and INFJs? No, I ought not. Will I anyway? Probably. That's just kind of how I roll. And everybody kind of goes, but Eric, and I go, hey, just let it go. Just let it slide. Just let it be, as the Beatles once said in their song of the same name. Just let it be, let it be. Eric's right, just let it be. I believe the lyrics were. Just let it be. So anyway, that's my response to this notion of INFJs having a big ego. They do not have a big ego. They have a conflicted self-concept because they need an external validating machine that's correct. ENTPs also need this. We need a significant other who is correct about us. And if they're correct about us, then it means they value us a great deal and think very highly of us. Respect our intuition, enjoy our company, and all that kind of shit. And, find us attractive and want to be with us and just generally are validating all that is good about us, while at the same time not putting up with the things about us that are bad. Like, if I am being unfair, I need to hear about it. If I'm being mean to somebody, I need to hear about it, And that's the other thing, is because both types are very metaphysical, INFJs is well known, hate being lied to more than anything. It's like, do not lie to me if you're an INFJ. It's your number one. Just have that on a t-shirt and walk around with it. ENTPs, I don't mind being lied to in certain contexts because you're digging your own grave, as far as I'm concerned. It's like, if you're gonna try to make any arguments based on a lie, it'll end up catching you, and I'll win the argument. But INFJs are sort of morally offended by it, especially with not just lying, but phoniness, like trying to fake out an INFJ with fake emotional displays or trying to manipulate an INFJ with emotional stuff will piss them off beyond all measure. I've not really experienced it because I've not really done that, but they find it disturbing. I can tell you that. Like, what does this person think they're getting? Do they think they're pulling some shit on me? They don't like it. So, at the end of the day, INFJ needs to be appreciated for the incredibly deft, aware creature that he or she is. And very few types can do that. Very few types can go, oh, I like the way you said this because of knowing all of these various little factors here that collapse down, and be able to sort of read what happened there, and appreciate what happened there. You got to be. It's like watching a good debate round. You have to be a certain amount knowledgeable in order to understand it and appreciate it. If you don't know anything about debate, you'll miss almost everything that's going on. Now, being in a relationship as an ENTP is like being a metaphysician who's dating mostly patience. But when an ENTP dates another INFJ, it's like they're dating another metaphysician. And they can talk shop. So, anyway, in the process of talking shop, they both build more solid self-concepts because they have a reliable external validating machine that each of them needs to really feel confident about conclusions to draw. And that is my end of my video called INFJ Universality and Self-Concept. Please take a moment to like and sub as I play you this video as an outro.
Dancing Party Dance is the name of this song, and instead of learning words, you should dance along. If you don't know the dance, don't fret about it, friend, cause dance teaching songs have a long tradition, and the Dancing Party Dance goes with the song. It's not a hard dance to do and not too long. First you're walking forward, pointing and stuff. Look around now, wave, pull out your guns. Now walking backwards, total 4 steps. Once there, drop your guns, cause it's time to rest and do the axle rose by dipping your hips. Clap, step it back, clap, clap. Down to the foot, the dance is on the left. First pan it out of view, then pan it back correct. Next to the foot, the dance is on the right. First you pan it out of view, then you pan it back inside. Look over your shoulder, be tugging a kite. Let it go in the cold, dark a fight. Finally clap your hands to your ass. Check you 1, check you 2, then slap your chest. Then slap your chest, then slap your chest. Dancing Party Dance, now back at its root. If you need another chance, put this video on loop. First you're walking forward, pointing and stuff. Look around now, wave, pull out your guns. Now walk it backwards, a total 4 steps. Once there, drop your guns, cause it's time to rest and do the axle rose by dipping your hips. Clap, step it back, clap, clap. Down to the foot, the dance is on the left. First pan it out of view, then pan it back correct. Next to the foot, the dance is on the right. First you pan it out of view, then you pan it back inside. Look over your shoulder, be tugging a kite. Let it go in the cold, dark of fight. Finally clap your hand to your ass. Check cheek 1, check cheek 2, then slap your chest. Then slap your chest, then slap. Dancing Party Dance is the name of this song, and instead of learning words, you should dance along.
Just because I do, the DPD Funk Police are afraid of me.
One more time, Cam.
What's the matter with
Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed that song. It's Dancing Party Dance. I still want to make another video of that with various different people doing that dance. If you'd like to submit one, Rachel's going to do it. We're going to record her doing it. So if you'd like to submit one, please do. Don't forget to eat plenty of cheese, and thanks for watching.